Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely, and I just want to record a short podcast on a very interesting news item that appeared on Bloomberg the other day. The gravamen of the story was that the Trump administration is asking Russia to act as a go-between on the question of Iran's nuclear program. And they would like Russia to serve as a mediator between the United States and Iran. Now, we know that uh, Donald Trump was very unhappy about the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that was signed in 2015, that was designed to bring under international control Iran's nuclear program. And when he promised to walk out on the JCPOA, and he did so. And after walking out on the JCPOA, he reimposed all the sanctions on Iran and launched his maximum pressure campaign that included the assassination of Iranian war hero General Soleimani. Now, um, over the past, let's say, 6 months or so, the international situation has deteriorated for Iran. Iran lost its key ally, Syria, and it lost, or its great ally Hezbollah in Lebanon has been greatly weakened, which means that Iran's situation in the Middle East is much worse than it was just a few years ago, worse than it was at the time of the JCPOA. Now, when Trump returned to power, Iran knew that it was going to face a serious situation. Because, of course, Iran knows that Israel is chomping at the bit and would like to launch a serious military attack in order to debilitate and weaken Iran. And Israel, obviously, would like the United States to join in this enterprise. Israel has been pushing for a United States military action against Iran for many years. Now, Trump, is not a war maker. He's not a wartime president. That's not his thing. On the other hand, he's clearly extremely eager to please Israel, eager to please the Zionist lobby. And there's some unfinished business for him when it comes to Iran, because he promised that he would sign a much, much better deal with Iran than the JCPOA, better in the sense that it would impose much tighter restrictions on Iran. So this is again something that Trump would like to accomplish in his second term. But he's also being pushed by Israel, and Israel thinks that this is the right time to hit Iran. Iran has lost its key ally of Hezbollah. It's lost its key ally in Syria. And so, and Russia, which had been an important, I won't say ally exactly, but an important partner of Iran's, Russia is bogged down in its war in Ukraine. But that's why that the arrival of the Trump administration is a moment of some danger to Iran. That basically Trump and Netanyahu may come up with a plan to hit Iran militarily, but also to launch a variety of color revolutions in Iran, sponsoring irredentist movements, sponsoring various nationalist uprisings. Iran is it's a mixture of many different nations, and it wouldn't be that difficult. This is something the Americans are very good at, and it wouldn't be that difficult to sponsor various nationalist disturbances, or the sudden spontaneous appearance of democratic movements in Tehran, women's movements, and so on. So Iran at the moment, therefore, doesn't really have too many options. And so this is where Russia comes in. Now, relations between Iran and Russia haven't been so warm in recent times. One obvious issue was Syria. Russia didn't do anything to keep Bashar al-Assad in power. So in 2015, there was this joint coalition of Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah that intervened in Syria and prevented the Obama, Saudi, ISIS plan to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. It was a great triumph and a great victory for the Russian-Iranian coalition. However, since then, that partnership hasn't really done very much. I mean, the war in Syria really wasn't won. Assad stayed in power, but he controlled really very limited amount of Syrian territory. And when the ISIS or Al Qaeda, the Turkish-sponsored Islamist movement, launched their campaign in November of last year, Iran almost certainly would have expected Russia to do a little more to keep Assad in power. After all, this attack was in broad daylight. It was a ragtag army. It was hardly anything terribly formidable. It wouldn't have been that problematic for Russia to use its air power, its artillery, to destroy this offensive army of Al Qaeda. But Russia didn't do it. Russia obviously was much too preoccupied with its war in Ukraine. And then, of course, another bone of contention has been Israel. Now, Russia and Iran have very different views on Israel. Russia is not the Soviet Union. Soviet Union had very poor relations with Israel. In fact, it had no diplomatic relations really from 1967 to about 1991. But Russia has rather good relations with Israel. In fact, Russia has taken a rather gentle approach on Israel's war on Gaza. While it has condemned Israeli actions, it's hardly been in the forefront of leading any kind of anti-Israel campaign at the United Nations or anything like that. So that's a problem. Iran is the leader of the anti-Israel resistance, but Russia is kind of absent from the fighting. And Russia under Putin has gone out of its way to cultivate good relations with the Israeli government and doesn't want to do anything to jeopardize that. So much so that Russia has not provided Iran with the S-400 anti-missile defense systems. That's a very sore point for Iran, and particularly given that Israel attacked Iran twice last year, and Iran didn't have the S-400s that could have helped ward off this attack. And nothing has happened since then to help Iran out. And so while Iran has provided arms for Russia in its war in Ukraine, it's sent missiles, it's sent drones. Russia really hasn't done that much for Iran. So relations are not great. However, both countries need each other. They're both, internationally isolated, or at least isolated as far as the West is concerned. And the West controls all the various monetary and financial institutions. And so if you're under sanctions, they're both basically under sanctions from the West. So there's a kind of symbiosis of interest between them. But nonetheless, there are differences between the two states. So Trump clearly is thinking big things. We know that he doesn't think there's any purpose whatsoever to be served by continuing this war in Ukraine. The Biden administration and the Democrats and the whole liberal internationalist George Soros, NGOs, think tank crowd that want to use Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. None of that is of any interest to Trump. Trump's focus is on the rivalry with China. He sees Russia as being useful there. I don't think Trump thinks that highly of Russia. I don't think he thinks that Russia is a major world power. But nonetheless, having Russia on America's side against China would be very useful. And clearly that's why he thinks that, it's time to wrap this up in Ukraine and see if, Russia can be used against China. I think that's a forlorn hope, for the obvious reason that there's no need for Russia to take an anti-Chinese course. So why would Russia do that? There's no conflict between Russia and China. There are no territorial issues dividing them. There are no ideological issues dividing them. There are no economic issues dividing them. So what would be the need for Russia to adopt an anti-Chinese stance? So I don't think that is going to get very far. However, it's very useful for Russia to cease to be so dependent on China and India, because that's where it sells its energy at cut rate prices. So if Russia is able then to once again to sell its energy to the West as well as to the East, then Russia will be able to make a little more money. So that's obviously something the Russians would want. But there's another issue, obviously, other than China, that the Trump administration is concerned about, and that's the Middle East. And there's always a danger that the United States will get sucked into another Middle East war. Trump doesn't want to do it, but given his hostility to Iran, given the closeness between America and Israel, given the power of the Israel lobby, there is indeed a very decent chance that America will get sucked into some kind of a war with Iran. Hence, this feeler that apparently has been put out by the Trump administration to the Russians to get the Iranians to agree to some kind of a negotiation, to get them to agree to some new version of a nuclear deal. And the Russians seem to be quite open to this opportunity. So let's first of all look at the Bloomberg story, and here we have this. The headline, Putin agrees to help Trump broker nuclear talks with Iran. I think the headline is a little over stated. I think the Russians, I think, as we read the story, the Russians are certainly open to to helping out here, but I don't think there's any kind of agreement that's been reached. And then we have, it says, Russia agreed to assist U.S. President Donald Trump's administration in communicating with Iran on issues including Islamic Republic's nuclear program and its support for regional anti-U.S. proxies, and according to people familiar with the situation. But this is very interesting because it says it's agreed to assist in communicating. So that's a long way from, let's look at that headline again, help Trump broker nuclear talks with Iran. So we're not talking brokering any talks here. He's just saying they've agreed to communicate the Trump administration's wishes. Now, if it's on a nuclear program, then that's perfectly reasonable because, of course, Russia played a key role in the JCPOA. Not only was it a party to the JCPOA, but it was Russia that helped Iran to get rid of its enriched uranium. So, that was part of the deal, was that any enriched uranium that Iran produced through its nuclear energy program, that enriched uranium was handed over to Russia. So it wouldn't actually keep any of the enriched uranium. So Russia was a key player in the JCPOA. But this part, where it says, and its support for regional anti-US proxies, that would suggest that Russia would be willing to take America's side against these anti-US proxies. Now, that would include, I guess, Hezbollah, a much weakened and diminished Hezbollah, but also the Houthis. And that would really put Russia in a very different position than the one it's so far taken, because Russia was in some ways on the side of the resistance. So while it maintained good relations with Israel, it's nonetheless maintained also, a good relations with the resistance, and that includes Iran, obviously Syria, the Houthis, and Hezbollah. So here we have Trump relayed that interest directly to President Putin in a phone call in February. This is their one phone call on February the 12th. And top officials from his administration discussed the matter with their Russian counterparts at talks in Saudi Arabia days later. And there was mention, Lavrov did bring that up subsequently, that yes, the issue of Iran was discussed during those talks. And then White House officials who asked not to be identified discussing private deliberations said Russia offered to do the outreach without being asked to play that role. So Russia offered to do the outreach without being asked to play that role. Well, again, that would be very interesting in how Iran feels about this. Iran obviously is in a vulnerable position. I mean, it's lost its allies. It has Trump in the White House. Obviously has very bad memories of the first Trump administration. It has Israel, which now obviously feels that this is the right time to deal with all of its enemies. This is the moment. They already took out the leaders of Hezbollah. They've already much diminished Hamas. So why not go after the source of their problems, or at least the source as is that Israel claims is the source of their problems, and namely Iran. So if that you got Israel, Iran all lined up against you, Iran is going to turn to Russia. Now the question then is, and from this article, it doesn't sound as if Russia will be particularly solidly behind Iran. It sounds like more that it's going to communicate to Iran America's demands. So, this is what the Trump administration would like from you. And you may not have too many options at the moment to say no. So it says here, yeah, the discussions are in their initial stage, and it's not clear whether any talks between the US and Iran would yield any progress. President Trump made clear by renewing his maximum pressure order just days into his second term, the United States will not tolerate Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon or their support of terror in the Middle East and around the world. Now, of course, the America's intelligence services concluded many years ago that there is no Iranian plan to acquire nuclear weapons. So this is entirely a red herring put out by some of the people around Trump, and of course put out by Israel, that Iran is determined to acquire nuclear weapons. Now, the issue, however, of terror in the Middle East, that's the American-Israeli agenda. There's something called the terror in the Middle East. They label anything that Israel doesn't like as terrorists. That's not necessarily Russia's position. In fact, it isn't Russia's position. But again, if Russia plays this game, it's going to find itself playing on the American-Israeli team. The Trump administration will talk to our adversaries and allies alike, but he will always do so from a position of strength to defend our national security. And then he says, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said in response to questions sent by Bloomberg that Russia believes that the United States and Iran should resolve all problems through negotiation, and that Moscow is ready to do everything in its power to achieve this. But this is where it gets puzzling, which is, why would Russia be ready to do everything in its power to achieve this? Because whatever agreement is reached, it's not going to be an agreement that's going to work well for Iran. They're going to sign another nuclear agreement, which will obviously be tougher and more restrictive than the JCPOA. It will lead to Iranian weakness and dependence on the United States, and wouldn't necessarily provide any long-term security for Iran, because again, America and Israel would still be targeting Iran. But just from Russia's perspective, it isn't clear why trying to facilitate an agreement between the United States and Iran is something that they would want to work on. Because to be honest, given that this is the United States that has been waging a proxy war against you for a number of years, very acutely in recent years in Ukraine, but even before then. That's the same United States. This is Donald Trump, the same Trump who boasts that he sent Javelin missiles to Ukraine, who boasts that these Javelins were devastating to the Russians. So now he's trying to help this same United States, um, get an agreement and weaken Iran. You would think that Russia would be helping Iran and trying to strengthen Iran. Iran, after all, has helped Russia. It sent missiles to Russia. It provided drones to Russia. So therefore, it's in Russia's interest to strengthen Iran and to uh, give headaches to the United States. And because weakening Iran means weakening Russia's own position in the Middle East. A spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry, when asked if Russia had offered to mediate between Tehran and Washington, said it was natural to offer their assistance. And then he goes on. Top U.S. and Russian officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, discussed Washington's interest in Moscow helping with Iranian issues during a February 18th meeting in Riyadh. According to people with knowledge of the situation, then he says Russia's Lavrov later shared details about the U.S. meeting with his Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi when they met in Tehran. Araghchi said in a televised press conference after the meeting. And then on Tuesday, Russia's Interfax news agency cited Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov as saying Russia and the U.S. discussed Iran during the Riyadh meeting and agreed to separate discussions on the matter. Ushakov said there'd been no further signals from the U.S., according to Interfax. But again, it still raises the question. Of course, for the Americans, it's understandable why they would do this. Trump doesn't want to go to war with Iran. He would much rather weaken and diminish Iran by agreement. But if he doesn't do that, then of course there are other options on the table. So the American policy is understandable to the extent that you can understand that logic. I'm still baffled why Russia would play any role in all of this. It would be in Russia's interest to strengthen Iran, just like it was in Russia's interest to provide Iran with the S-400 anti-missile defense systems, which could be used against Israel. They could certainly be used against the United States, and therefore would give Iran more leverage because it would be able to withstand American pressure because it has S-400s, which would be quite effective. So if the worst comes to the worst, and America and Israel launch attacks on Iran, Iran would have some means of defending itself. You would think that that would be in Russia's interest. And then here's TASS, which says Russia sees potential for peace settlement of Iranian nuclear issue. And here says Iran is an ally of Russia, and Moscow sees a potential for a peace settlement regarding the country's nuclear program, which is a concern for the United States. This is Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov said at a news briefing. The Russian position is that this issue, Iran's nuclear dossier, should be resolved exclusively through peaceful political and diplomatic means. We believe there is a potential for this. So, I mean, that again would be strange because there had already been an agreement, the JCPOA, which, and there's no evidence whatever that Iran was in any violation of the JCPOA. It had followed to a letter all of the stipulations, including the handover of its enriched uranium to Russia. So when Trump walked away from the JCPOA in 2018, this was entirely a unilateral step by the United States, because they didn't like Trump, just didn't like the JCPOA. He couldn't provide any evidence that Iran had violated the agreement. He just never liked the agreement to begin with, and Netanyahu never liked the agreement to begin with. That's why they walked away. So, having already sabotaged one deal, this same Trump is asking Russia to facilitate another deal, which will be, much harsher on Iran, because because it seems like the Americans will almost certainly want restrictions on Iran's ballistic missiles. There was talk of that there was some provisions in that the JCPOA, but it wasn't mandatory. And of course, again, Iran's proxies. So these are all things that the Americans are demanding from Iran. It's a way of weakening Iran. But this is hardly would be in in Russia's interest. Russia would want to have a number of balls up in the air in the Middle East. It would want a strong Iran and strong Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, rather than throwing in its lot with the United States and the Saudis and the Gulf states. And then Peskov goes on, as Iran is our ally and partner, a country with which we are developing comprehensive, mutually beneficial and respectful cooperation, Russia is ready to do everything possible to facilitate this. So suddenly America is your friend and ally, you're helping to facilitate, some agreement. I mean, he says Iran is your partner, is an ally and partner. The Americans are not your allies and partners. The Americans are not allies and partners of Iran. It's a long history of that, and we again, going back to Trump's first term and the assassination of Soleimani. Not to mention America's unrestricted support for Israel and Israel's war against Iran. And so now the way he's talking about, oh, well, we're just trying to get two friends to come to an agreement. Now, one could say, well, yeah, but maybe this is all part of the process of détente. And there's something to that. However, one can talk about détente after this Ukraine issue is sorted out. If the Ukraine issue could be sorted out in a way that's favorable to Russia, then maybe we would talk about other issues that the Americans and the Russians could work out. But at this stage, it's not at all clear that the Trump administration has any particular interest in helping Russia out. And says ready to do everything possible to facilitate this. The United States is aware of this. Iran's nuclear program was briefly discussed in Riyadh during the high-level talks between Moscow and Washington. It was touched upon, but not in detail. The Kremlin spokesman noted, we anticipate separate discussions on this topic. In fact, this has been proposed to establish it as a distinct area of our dialogue and future consultations. And Iran has consistently pursued a civilian nuclear program. Exactly, civilian nuclear program. No, so what's there to talk about? I mean, it's a civilian nuclear program. The Americans have made this stuff up that Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons. However, the West suspects that it may have military applications, which explains the sanctions against Tehran. In 2015, the UN Security Council, along with Germany, approved the JCPOA regarding Iran's nuclear program, which was intended to lift sanctions on Tehran. However, Donald Trump canceled the agreement after taking office in 2016. Yeah. And I think that's it. So, obviously, this is a very interesting development. But again, you always have to wonder why Russia is going out of its way to help out the United States. If the United States were to do the same for Russia, then it would be understandable. But at this stage, Iran's been a good ally of Russia's. It's been one of the few powers that has actually provided concrete help for Russia. The states that belong to the Collective Security Treaty Organization, with with the exception of Belarus, they provided no assistance to Russia. So, but Iran has and North Korea has. So you then wonder, well, what's Russia going to do next? When the Trump administration said, you know what, we need to ensure that North Korea gets rid of its nuclear weapons. Can you help us out on that? Well, let's see. The Middle East is somewhere where Russia can actually do something in order to diminish the power of the West. They can just give headaches for the West in ways that the West gives headaches to Russia in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. But here, this is something that Russia can do, and to make life difficult for the United States, Israel, and Western interests. But seemingly that's not what Russia is seeking to do here. So we're going to watch how this unfolds. But it's where this new rapprochement between the United States and Russia is heading will clearly be rather interesting. So thank you very much for joining me. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.